Alexa Blair Wilkinson is a creative director, graphic designer, and photojournalist based in New York. Their graphic design and photography journey started in tandem with a once thriving music career back in the early 2000s. They received an AAS graphic design degree from Parsons School of Design in 2011. After the pandemic, photography and graphic design became Alexa's full-time role. They now use their 16-plus years of professional experience and passion to inform and shape their view of the world's injustices and beauty. Though their professional history has been quite robust, Alexa's work has always attempted to center calls for social justice and utilizing social media as an educational and activation tool. Their latest work as a photojournalist centers around the Palestinian liberation movement, covering protests from New York City to DC. Thank you so much for doing this because I have been such a huge fan. I think I discovered you through Writers Against the War on Gaza.
Mm,
Like when they shared something that you posted. So yeah, I've been
yeah.
following your work for a while. So it was really cool that you responded.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I want to assume that it was the New York Times distribution shutdown. Yeah. Those are some of my favorite photos. Because that action was so frustrating and so long and so cold, but it was really impactful and they did a really good job with that. I was really, really proud to be a part of that action.
That's awesome. But yeah, I love photojournalism. Not a lot of people know this, but I actually was a photojournalism major at one point in my life. I was triple majoring in English, news editorial journalism, and photojournalism, but then I had to drop that last major. So
I'm sorry. That's such a bummer. I can imagine why you went for that. It's such a, when I first started, I thought like photojournalism, that's it for me. And then I realized like what photojournalism is. And then I thought I had to take classes for it. And um, so many people told me that like they did take that course and they did like major in it and they learned more on the street just doing it than they did in that class. So don't let it deter you from picking a camera back up again and getting back into it if that's something you want to keep doing.
that's great to hear. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's start there. Let's start with grad school. How did you end up doing what you do?
So that's a good question. I mean, I started as a graphic designer, like I was barely out of high school. I was a young singer-songwriter and I needed to design things like merch and my own website and CDs and like my tour posters and stuff. But I basically had like no budget to hire anyone. But along the way, I sort of like knew that I couldn't take pictures of myself. So I actually had access to some pretty incredible photographers who allowed me to be like my full self and be wacky and bring my own art paired with my music into it. So I learned a lot about photography through them and I sort of fell in love with it. And the camera I use actually is my mom's camera. She's a professional photographer, or she was. She had to go back into like her 9 to 5 kind of work because photography doesn't pay that well. But she's a professional photographer. So being a graphic designer, I sort of fell into it because of music, and then I got better at it, and then I just continued down the graphic design journey into like creative director roles and creative management roles. And then picked up a camera when, you start to do graphic design every single day and it becomes just work. It's no longer about art. It's more about like producing for other people. And photography feels just like the next step of my evolution of my creativity and how I like to combine my just the way I see the world and how I want to be creative in the world with my brain. I don't know if that makes any sense. I feel like I'm talking in circles and I'm saying a lot of nonsense, but I don't feel like graphic design is the way I can do that anymore. And photography feels like just a natural step in that progression of how I express myself.
No, that makes total sense. What do you think it is about photography that makes it a powerful medium for storytelling?
I think the picture is always the story. Even when the context can later like shatter the narrative that you've had in your head. I mean, when you think about world events and you think about like famous like world events, you often more than not think about like pictures that are associated with them. You think about World War II, you think about just the images of like the atomic bombs, you think about the end of the World War, and this is like a classic example. Like the kissing sailor in the shot in 1945 to us and to a lot of people that don't know the backstory. That story to them when they see that photo is a sailor coming home like kissing his sweetheart, but that's actually a picture of sexual assault. So the picture is always the story, and that tends to take up the narrative. So I would say that photography is a powerful medium for storytelling, and that you can immediately make someone you can create a certain narrative based on just the picture alone, but without context, it sort of falls apart. So I think photography is 90% of storytelling when you're talking about newsworthy events or historic events like what we're seeing now.
I think that ties in nicely to this question from the audience. What role does composition play in your storytelling and how do you approach it? And I'm guessing that means like from a craft perspective, how do you like frame the composition of the photograph in order to tell the story?
Yeah, I mean, this question makes me laugh just a little bit, just because the nature of what I'm doing, it doesn't particularly leave much room for careful composition. Like I can't consider composition all the time, but I try to, and all photographers do. I mean, the work I've done over the past 9 months has been essentially to tell truth to power. So the composition I aim for is to always show power, solidarity, love within communities that I've been invited to. You see photographers scramble for like the best possible angles of various moments during a protest, especially arrest. And I think that when the right moment comes along, when your point of view can truly show the full scope, it's a very lucky and more often than not terrifying moment. So in short, not to make it long, but composition is everything, but it's also incredibly hard to plan out, and you just work with what you have in the moment that you have it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Talk me through your process. What does it look like to cover a protest as a photojournalist?
Oh boy. I mean, covering events typically starts with me getting somewhere early, just taking a moment to like scope out my surroundings. Most events I cover, they typically have heavy police presence. And if we're going to be, accurate with the events, I cover the majority of the things I cover are pro-Palestinian and liberation movement events and protests and action. So a lot of police presence, and you want to make sure you're sort of checking your surroundings. So that's I try and get acquainted with the space first and foremost. Um, no two protests are the same. No two events are the same. Although it's a lot of the same faces. The lighting's always different, so you want to check. Is it overcast? Is it going to be blown out exposure? You do a lot of test shots. You sort of walk around and just like see people, bump elbows. Just make sure that you have each other's back. And from there, you kind of just get into the motion of trying to capture all the angles of all the speakers, of people leading chants. You want to make sure you get consent from everyone as much as possible. So a lot of time that I spend in the crowd taking shots of people in a crowd or holding up a sign, I spend a lot of time interacting with people more than I end up taking photos. I ask for consent. I show them a photo. I introduce myself. I get to know them. We exchange numbers, and that's sort of how I've gotten on a roll of going to a lot of actions and getting invited to more and more of them. Is that just actually connecting with people? So I'd say like my process is mostly about connection with other humans and not necessarily keeping myself at arm's length with a lens in my hand. Um, I could go into a whole like my entire process. I just think that would be so boring. I'll just spare everyone the long version. Basically, like I shoot on instinct. I aim to cover as much of an event and an action as possible from as many angles as possible. Sometimes it's difficult. I'm pretty short and I'm a people pleaser, and I don't like to just burst through crowds and like disrupt anyone. So I have to like maneuver carefully with myself and my large backpack. But, I try and capture emotion, truth, art, love, solidarity, support, anger, rage, everything. I try and be respectful. Like I said, I always ask for consent, and it's sort of a rush every single time. And I haven't gotten over like the nervous part of any of it yet. It's still always just a little bit of a shaky moment for me when things start to get exciting. So from then I have no idea what to tell you. I just do what I do. I'm just running and shooting. It's really hard to describe.
What is your go-to camera for things like that?
So I only have the one camera body. I, like all the other photographers out here shooting, we do not get paid for this, so I don't have like multiple camera bodies. I actually have a mirror camera. I don't have a mirrorless. It shocks everyone that I tell them. I know it shocks everyone when I tell them. I mean, my go-to lens though is the one that it's my 2470, and I think it's a really, really good lens to capture wide angle and then do some like small telephoto moments where you can zoom in. I've just been sticking with that one lens for now. I've tried to ditch my 7200 because she's a big, big lens. She's huge and heavy, and you want to stay light and able to adjust to sort of your surroundings and the moment. So I try to be light. I try to have versatility in one lens. So for me, my camera body is a Canon 60. It's an old antique, but she's sturdy and she's held up in the rain and the snow. And I use that one lens typically now.
That's fascinating.
Yeah,
You mentioned that you're short. How short are you?
I'm
Just out of
five
curiosity.
three.
Okay.
I'm short.
I'm 5'0", and I also understand the struggle.
Do you ever get told you have like a tall personality?
Yes, all the time.
Yeah.
I
What
like to
is that?
maintain that, so I'm not gonna leave this in the interview, but yeah.
Yeah, no. And people are like, oh, I didn't think you'd be this short. I'm like, I didn't need to hear that. I'm very self-conscious about how short I am. And it's funny because when I'm shooting and like there's an arrest happening and then everyone swarms, it's literally the tallest dudes in the world that are right in front of me. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll just get on the ground then. And like I actually end up getting some really amazing shots like on the ground and between people's feet. So sometimes it helps.
That's awesome. Can I leave that in there?
Yeah.
Okay, that is so cool, actually. Short people unite.
Yeah, we have to be innovative with how we use our height in the world. So I'll just get the lowest possible. I'll lay on the ground. You all can tower above.
What role do you think photojournalism has played in recent events?
Well, a lot. I think there's a real true love-hate relationship with photojournalists and protesters. At the same time that we're capturing living history, there's a reality of police state and state surveillance that just can't be ignored. While we're capturing arrest and police brutality, we're also capturing possible incriminating moments. And I've been told what I do is important work. So I just keep doing it and I feel drawn to it. But I think that photojournalism is only as good as the photojournalist. So it pains me to see how cold and something like seemingly out of touch some photojournalists have become. Like less interested in the point of why they're there and more interested about the paycheck. But if we're truly the eyes of the community and our work reflects the message and feelings of the community, it's vital and important for protest narratives that we get the message across and we get it across truthfully. So I think photojournalism has the capacity to do that. But at the same time, it really, again, depends on the context of the photo. So I think that it's important. And also I've heard that it's not as important. It just really depends on who you're talking to. I think that we wouldn't have the movement that we do without the journalists in Gaza right now. I think we wouldn't have the solidarity and the anger and the rage that is normal and appropriate for what's happening without these incredibly brave people that have been just working their just to their bone, have been working every single day to show us what's going on. So it's the only photojournalists in the world that are ever given honors and ever being shown is them, then that would be enough for me. So I think it's been very important in that aspect.
That's awesome. How do you balance journalistic objectivity and empathy in your work?
I don't. I can't. I tried to. I think there's a time and a place for objectivity. I think like if you're a sports photographer and you're rooting for one team, you can probably keep that to yourself. You're there to capture the full event. That's sort of a neutral ground to be objective in. But I think in the face of a genocide, I'm not really sure how you can remain objective or unbiased. And I think that my rage and my unbiased opinion about what's happening fuels my art and my creativity and how I approach these protests, because someone who's trying to remain unbiased might not have any hesitations about showing a hijab being ripped off, might not show any hesitation about respecting people's, privacy, masks being ripped off. I think it's incredibly important to remain grounded in your empathy and to remain grounded in your humanity when you're doing this. And I don't really understand how you can be unbiased and objective, honestly. So I don't balance it, is the answer to that question.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's a great outlook to have. But on that note, what do you think art's role is in times of political upheaval?
I mean, I think artists in a way have always been there to sort of give people a way to make sense of the world during times of political upheaval through art. Actually, if we're bringing it back to grad school and to design school at Parsons, some of the ways that I fell in love with graphic design in terms of political art were the Polish protest posters of like the 1920s through 1945. There was a MoMA exhibit, and in between classes, I would go to MoMA and I would just sit there and really take in how they were conveying so much information in such a small space in a poster, so beautifully and so captivatingly. And I think that when we use art as a way to navigate political upheaval and political unrest and all the horrors in the world, it's sort of our brain being able to make sense of it and navigate it and move through it. So I think artists in all categories are important to it, not just photographers, but, printmakers, quilt makers, people that sew, people that paint murals. It's you see more graffiti when we're having political unrest. You see more street art. You see more people coming out of the woodwork doing like felt patches and just sticker making. It's when we feel our rage and our creativity come together and we're able to express ourselves in these ways. So I think it's vitally important, and it's something we shouldn't ignore.
Absolutely. What do you feel is the most impactful image you've captured? That's another audience question.
Um, oh, it has nothing to do with protests. I have two answers to this. The most impactful image that I personally captured was right after my nephew was born. My sister allowed me to bring my camera in, and wow, I didn't expect to like almost cry. My sister went through such a rough labor and just a rough time with pregnancy, and just watching her see her son for the first time and being able to capture that and be able to give that to her was so important for me. And so I think even those moments of like it's a very intimate moment. No one else is around. It's not like a national newsworthy moment, but those small micro moments of like pure joy and happiness and awe, those are some of my most impactful pictures, and those are the ones I covet the most and I cherish the most. That being said, protest photo, um, it's so weird because like when I shot a protest up in Newburgh in November, it was the one of the guy holding the flag in the middle of the street with like a street light in the background illuminating the flag. In December, it was a Within Our Lifetime protest outside the American Natural History Museum. In January, it was another one. It's just so dependent on what's happened. I think one of my favorite ones though is when we were protesting at City Hall, and people were flipping off the cops, and I got a photo of it, and it's the background on my phone. So that's my that's my favorite photo and the most impactful photo for me. Just because it shows young rage right now. It was just young kids angry, and I love it. It's my favorite shot.
I'm always blown away by your images. There's always something so like fresh and alive about them every single time. Even though of course they're like essentially the same event. And I realize that photographing protests all the time does not mean that like you're photographing the same thing over and over. And
Yeah.
new things happen every time, I'm sure. But how do you manage to keep it like fresh and alive?
That's a really good question, because we all complain about it. It's sometimes it's like the same posters over and over again. It's the same, like I've gotten that shot before. I've gotten like, there's one example, within our lifetime has this long black banner that they put on the ground and then they carry through protest. And when I first saw it, everyone gets really excited when they see it. It's this big banner, everyone's carrying it, it's a good shot. But I've gotten so many photos of like every possible angle of that banner. I just don't shoot it anymore because it's like kind of boring for me. It's not interesting for me anymore. Doesn't mean the banner is boring, and it doesn't mean it doesn't hold importance in the movement and the march itself. It just means that I think we're always searching for a new angle, a fresh face, and you just kind of got to work at it because there will be moments when you're kind of bored, sorry to say, and you just gotta like, I think those are the moments when you just gotta like reach out and say like, what haven't I done yet, or like what's a new angle or what a fresh approach. um Put your camera on the ground and see how that feels. Put it up in the air, turn it on its side, flip your head upside down, see what works best. I think you just gotta keep your brain working, keep your brain moving. And also, I mean, sometimes in those moments when you're feeling a little bored, maybe that's okay. Maybe take a rest and a break and let your mind just relax a little bit and be in the moment instead of just trying to shoot it and be at arm's length all the time. So I think the way that I keep things fresh is I just always try and look for a new angle, always try and look for, something that maybe just sparks a little bit more interest in me, like someone's sign or face or focusing on hands or just like something more like close up instead of far away. Or I just take a breather and then let my mind relax and come back to the moment.
How do artists navigate the desire to be seen versus the feeling of potentially exploiting the people in their photographs? Or if you want to think about this from just like art in general, that perspective, how do you talk about the human condition without feeling like you're exploiting people when you feature them?
How you navigate it is letting go of ego. Um, I mean, my personal opinion is that the goal of an artist should be to serve the community that you're creating for. And maybe that's not my definition. Just because of who I am and the person that I am, and I can't change that about myself. But I think that, you know, when you won't be exploiting people if they consent to your your time with them and your photos or the way you use their likeness. I know it's I know why you're asking it because when we have conversations about protest photos and there's a lot of money to be made from people that shoot for like Getty and Associated Press and people that are with those national, organizations that they don't care if you like get your mask ripped off. They'll send that photo because it's a good shot. Of you getting pepper sprayed and your like snot's coming out of your mouth. Like maybe you don't want people to see that. I just think to how to navigate that and to keep your humanity is just constantly check in about why you're there. What are your intentions? Do you have consent and trust from the community? And if you do, then at that point, I don't think there's anything exploitative about it. I think that it's mostly just building relationships and trust within the community because it's so easily broken and it's so hard to get. And it's just not something that I take lightly. So for me, I don't feel like I'm exploiting people, but if someone feels like I have, please contact me. And I would love to take accountability for that and make sure that, I hold myself to a higher standard than, you know, most people do, I hope.
I think that's a great response. I'm always so curious to hear about well, I started this channel after a poetry MFA, and I interview a lot of poets, and I'm constantly asking them about like truth in their writing and how they like feature real life people in their writing. Poets often discuss the responsibility of featuring like real life people when they just like bring them into poems, and you have to weigh the consequence of that sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes the effect of bringing them in doesn't really like justify bringing in another person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think relating that to photography, I mean, there's a lot of conversation about like blurring faces and making sure people's faces are obscured and keeping people's like likeness out of photos, just honestly for security and safety reasons. and so many photographers. And I think like what's interesting is that we all get it. Like, of course I will remove a photo. Of course I will blur a face if someone asks me to. But it's so, I feel like it takes away from the actual experience of being there, which is what we're all trying to convey, is by obscuring someone's face. Because like you were there, you were screaming, you did that thing. Like I think those of us behind the lens are like, why aren't you proud of that? But at the same time, it's like they might be proud of it. They don't need their boss to see it. So at that point, if you start to push back on people just because you have an ego about your photo, like get over yourself. There's always going to be another photo to take. There's always going to be another person that's going to consent and be okay with it, and you can take that shot. So, yeah, I think like if you're a poet and you're talking about like a real person in a real situation in a very vulnerable moment, and they didn't give consent for that, that's exploitative. You know, like you're using that person's situation for your own gain. The same can be said for photojournalists that just literally don't care about anyone else but themselves.
Yeah. And when it comes to
Yeah.
poetry, sometimes the poet's interpretation of an event is going to be different than what actually happened. With poetry, you're so like limited in the things that you write, and the way that you write it might like steer the conversation towards something that didn't actually occur in
Hmm.
reality. I feel like that probably doesn't happen as often in photography, but I'm sure it still does. I think you brought up the whole like sailor thing.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
really
No,
cool
I mean that's a really good example. Yeah, because like I could take a picture of, there's counter protesters that show up, right? And they make like really ugly faces and they have their flags and they're like, what? Like, okay, but maybe 4 minutes ago that person was doing something nice for someone else and I didn't capture that. I mean, I'm not talking about who we know I'm talking about. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about like a picture doesn't show the full picture. It's a snapshot of a micro moment in time. Like it's not the full scope of what happened, which is why like a lot of us won't post just one singular photo unless it's like a hero shot or something that encapsulates like a fuller like picture of an event, because pairing it with like a sequence of photos that happened within that moment and within the protest makes a lot more sense and make that photo make more sense than if it was just on its own, because it requires some context. So yeah, there's less truth in photography than I think people give photography credit for.
Absolutely. This is related to an earlier question, but you probably consume a lot of images in your work as well. When you're looking at like other photojournalist images, but also like images from Gaza, how do you avoid becoming desensitized to to violence in images?
Um, I don't know, maybe someone could tell me. I I hate that we have um I don't know. You know what's weird is that I have become desensitized, and even in moments when I'm seeing police violence right in front of me or it's literally hitting me on the arm, I have become desensitized to it. I think it's a coping mechanism. I just think we're going to be in general desensitized to it the more we consume it. It's just the nature of what we are as human beings. Um, I think the way you keep your humanity through it is that, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, and I'm not telling anyone to stop watching it, but I'm saying putting your phone down and just taking a walk for 30 minutes and letting yourself process it. Because I think what we're doing is we're not allowing ourselves to fully sit and process what we're seeing. We're just scrolling through, we're reacting, and then we're moving along. And even in a protest, you see police ramming someone into the ground or into a fence or side of a wall, or they're batoning people or punching people, and you got to keep moving. So you get the shot and you move, and you get the shot and you move. And even when we're processing them later, we want to get that post up. We want to get that thing out. We're talking about something that just happened recently. We want to be the first to post, and you're not really processing it. So a lot of the conversations a lot of us photographers have is like, we need therapists and we need the ability to just like rest and just purely process what we've seen and what we've experienced, because it is brutal and it is violent. and it's scary and it's terrifying, and you don't really realize it until later. And in the moments when I find myself actually crying is when like I see happiness, and it's not necessarily the violence, it's when I see joy, because why isn't that all the time? So my advice is just take a minute and allow your brain to try and heal, because if you don't, you're just going to keep callousing over, and it well, eventually you won't feel anything.
I think that's beautiful. You've already kind of touched on this, but what advice would you give to aspiring photojournalists interested in covering similar topics?
I just had a conversation with actually a student photographer. I was in DC and she was selling Palestinian soccer jerseys, and I've really wanted one. So I was like, oh, sweet. So I bought one. And she's asking me about photography, and she told me she's a little too shy, or she's a little too nervous to get into it. And I said, I am too. And when I first started, I was nervous too. Like I said, I'm a people pleaser. I don't like disrupting. I don't like asking people for things that might bother them. I don't like saying, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me. I don't like asking people up front, if I can take their photo. I just want to be able to take their photo. And you very quickly kind of just like have to overcome a lot of the fears you have, and a lot of the immediate like fight or flight responses, because a lot of us, when we see stuff happening, we either are very drawn to it, or we are like, nope, and we want to run away. But your job as a photojournalist is to try and capture as much of a thing that's happening as possible. Um, so you want to be in the thick of it, and you definitely want to make sure you're safe while you're doing it. So you have to keep your wits about you. And, if you want to get into it and you're drawn to this type of photography, and you're drawn to this like style of photojournalism, you just gotta go and do it, honestly. Just pick up your camera. It doesn't matter what camera. Take a film camera, a disposable camera, and go and just shoot a protest and see how it feels to be in that role, and see if you like it. And if you like it, connect with people, ask them what's going on, ask about more actions happening. You'll start to get involved more, and then you'll just be on a roll, and it'll start to feel really natural.
Speaking of film cameras, my husband wants me to ask you if you have any tips for someone just starting out on 35 mm photography.
Yeah, I mean, 35 millimeter loves light. It does not like dark. So I would say my tips are to pick a, you know, pick a lens that you like, just like a 50 millimeter lens. Go out and take notes while you shoot, and sort of experiment. It depends on the type of camera, but experiment with different settings and different like ISO and apertures, and see what really works, and see what style you like. Try double exposure, just try everything and take notes. The internet is full of advice that is going to be way more advanced than I could possibly give. Um, but my advice is just like take the camera, go and take notes of like the overcast, was it overcast? Was it shady? Was it sunny? Like what setting did I shoot this at? And then see what you like after you develop it. And you can sort of evolve your style from there by just really doing it. And I know film is expensive, and so it's hard to give advice on just like, just go waste some pictures on nothing. But I think that's going to be the only way you're really going to get into it, is just by doing it and just fooling around and not being afraid to make mistakes.
Can you give our viewers a writing prompt based on your work?
Okay, so here's my writing prompt. What does this picture say to you about the state of free speech in this country?
You sound like you've done a lot of speaking.
Yeah. Well, when you're a songwriter and you're performing on stage, you gotta banter. I've always been comfortable speaking. I don't know why. I've always been fine with a microphone in my hand in front of a room. Never had an issue public speaking in my life. I think I don't know, my brain is weird. It thinks in circles and I talk in circles, but somehow people listen and it makes sense to them. So maybe everyone is neurospicy. Maybe we're all just a little neurodivergent, and somehow my style of speaking gets to people. Um, but yeah, thank you. This also the thing that's evolved with my photography is my writing, and I seem to be everyone seems to share my photos along with read the caption. So I'm getting into that more.
I feel like in the past, when I've shared your work, I've always wanted to like also screenshot the caption to share alongside it, so I completely understand.
Yeah, you're not alone. A lot of people do, and honestly, it's a huge compliment. I'm just saying what comes out of my brain through my thumbs into my phone. So I don't know. I'm glad that my words have resonated with people along with the photos because I don't know another way to do this. I just like I have to speak, and I've lost a lot of followers, and that's okay, and I'm fine with it. But the people that have responded well to what I'm saying means more to me than people just liking the images, quite honestly.
Do you have creative pursuits outside of photojournalism?
I mean, I'm a creative director, so I'm always doing something creative. Um, before I started being completely busy with photojournalism, I was doing a lot of like 3D design projects. So I'm always interested in doing that and learning more. I think my creative pursuits are always just going to be like, what new thing can I learn? Not necessarily for, the monetary aspect of it, but just learning and doing and discovering new things. So I'm a very curious person. I'm always going to try something new because I just can't sit still. So I think for me, I'm just going to try to keep evolving in my photography and try to continue moving forward with that. And at the same time, I think writing is going to be my new creative pursuit. Honestly, I think I'm really going to try to focus on the writing aspect of it as well. So 3D design, writing, more photography.
Awesome. Do you want to tell me more about those upcoming projects? I think you mentioned that you're going to try to break out into some sort of.
Yeah, I haven't decided what platform, but I know I'm going to be moving to more long form writing. I think maybe Patreon. I think maybe that's what I'm going to do because I want to give people the option of supporting. People have actually said they want to support what I'm doing, but I don't make it easy for them. I am constantly telling people, please don't donate to me or give me anything. I want you to give it to a family in Gaza or my friend who needs it, to something like that. So I want to give people the option of doing that, but not make it so people have to do that in order to read what I'm doing. But I feel like the captions aren't long enough sometimes for what I want to say, and people seem to be drawn to what I'm writing. So I think I'm going to try it out and see if it works. I'll let you know though, but I think that's what I'm going to be doing. I haven't solidified it yet, but yeah, that's that.
That's awesome. I look forward to reading all that. I am so, so grateful to you for doing this. I've learned so much. Is there anything I didn't touch on that you wanted to talk about?
So photojournalism is definitely going to be something that it's a word that I think doesn't necessarily embody like what I do and what some of the other people that I trust that are in my very like small circle do. I have labeled myself as like a photo radical just because it sounded good in the moment. I haven't come up with anything different, but it's not soulless what we do. We work incredibly hard at making sure we build trust with our community and we build trust within the spaces we've been invited into, especially me as a white female presenting person in the world. I hold a lot of privilege and power. And I would just say to anyone that looks like me, your first and foremost job as someone entering in these spaces is to respect and gain the trust of people that are inviting you in. If you have the luck to be invited into these spaces, cherish it and treasure it. And please just make sure you're being respectful of everyone around you and know that your role is important and what you do is important, but you have to approach it from a level of empathy and especially with the people that you're capturing in really vulnerable and terrifying moments. So please just always check in about your intentions, about why you're there, about who you're capturing and why you're posting it, and make sure that we're all here for each other and that we can all be in community together. And that's what this should be, is just complete community building. So anyone that wants to do this or anyone doing it now, um, that's what I want to say. I want to impress upon people. It's all about trust and community and making sure that you put the community ahead of your own ego and yourself.